Heggerty Haggerty and the Magic Marrow. Hello. I'm going to tell you about some wonderful adventures enjoyed by three friends who live together in a cottage. There's Broomstick and Blackcat and Heggerty Haggerty. And as I expect you've already guessed, Heggerty Haggerty is a witch. One day, Heggerty Haggerty pulled back the curtains at her bedroom window and smiled at the sunny morning. "What a lovely day," she said. "Just perfect for the village fete." She dressed quickly and called to Broomstick. "Come along, Broomstick, time to get up. It's a lovely day." "What's lovely about it?" said a sleepy voice. "Oh, Broomstick, the sun's shining, the birds are singing, and today's the day of the village fete." "Today? The village fete's today?" Broomstick flew downstairs. "No one said anything to me about it." "What nonsense," said Heggerty Haggerty. She gave Blackcat his saucer of milk. "I've been telling you about it for days. The trouble with you is you don't listen." "I do," replied Broomstick. "This year's fete is going to be great fun," said Heggerty Haggerty as she made breakfast. Broomstick listened carefully while watching the toast. "There's going to be a hoopla stall, a coconut shy, a throw-a-dart competition, all sorts of races, a bake-a-cake competition, a white elephant stall, and lots of other things besides. Oh, and a marrow competition." "What's that?" asked Broomstick. "Well, a competition to see who's grown the biggest marrow. Mine's very tiny, I'm afraid." "How big is it?" "About the size of my hand," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Doesn't stand a chance." "Well, I know it won't win," said Heggerty Haggerty, "but I don't mind." But Broomstick did mind. "What's the point of entering a competition if you aren't going to try and win?" Heggerty Haggerty said she was going down to the village to help get things ready. "I'll be back for you and Blackcat later," she called, "and for my marrow." So as soon as she was out of sight, Broomstick began to think of a plan. "What that marrow needs is fertilizer, magic fertilizer. That'll make it grow. Then it'll win the prize." He found the marrow in the garden. It was in a tiny flower pot sitting next to a tomato plant. It was very small and very green. Broomstick looked at it in disgust. "Farmer Giles is sure to have grown a whopper," he said. "Something must be done." Broomstick fetched Heggerty Haggerty's book of spells from behind the grandfather clock and looked under the letter F. He found a page headed Fertilizer. Magic. Guaranteed to make anything grow. "That's the one," he said, and set to work to gather everything he needed for the recipe. 2 dandelion roots, 2 dried buttercups, 3 small feathers, a pinch of moon dust, and 4 rose hips. He put them all in Heggerty Haggerty's big black cauldron with some water, and as he stirred the mixture over the fire, it began to bubble noisily. "I need just one more thing," said Broomstick, "to make the recipe work." "Blackcat, can I borrow one of your whiskers, please?" Blackcat stood up as Broomstick pounced. "I'll give it back," he said, his arms grasping Blackcat's round tummy. There was no escape, so Blackcat allowed him to take one whisker, and he dropped it into the cauldron, where it disappeared among the bubbles. At last, the magic fertilizer was finished. After what seemed like ages, Broomstick felt the side of the cauldron. Nice and cool," he said. He nearly dipped his finger in the fertilizer, but stopped himself. "Oops," he said with a chuckle. "I don't want my finger to grow." Broomstick carried the cauldron into the garden, and Blackcat trotted out behind him. "Will it work?" wondered Blackcat. Broomstick tilted the cauldron, and magic fertilizer splashed all over the baby marrow. "There's lots left. Do you think it needs any more?" Blackcat shook his head. But Broomstick didn't take any notice and poured the rest of the fertilizer over the marrow to make sure. It stood in its flower pot, soaking wet. "That should do it," said Broomstick. He carried the cauldron back indoors and tied it up. He put the book of spells in its place behind the grandfather clock and the lids tightly on all the jars of ingredients. He didn't want Heggerty Haggerty to know what he'd been doing. When he'd finished, he flew into the garden to look at the marrow. But nothing's happened. Broomstick was very disappointed. "It's not working," he said, as he gave Blackcat his whisker back. "Well, thanks anyway, Blackcat." Later, when Heggerty Haggerty arrived home, she was in a very cheerful mood. Broomstick and Blackcat looked through the window as Heggerty Haggerty went into the garden to collect her marrow. It didn't look the slightest bit bigger. Broomstick was even more disappointed, but he didn't say a word. "Small but nice," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Come on, you two, don't just stand there. Let's be on our way." Heggerty Haggerty and Blackcat climbed onto Broomstick's back. Broomstick flew high into the air. They could see the tents in the distance on the village green. Heggarty Haggerty steered Broomstick to the largest tent of all, and as he glided in through the door, people began to point and say, "Here's Heggarty Haggerty, and look what a lovely marrow she's brought. And oh, what a lovely colour green." How kind, thought Heggarty Haggerty, when it's such a tiny marrow. They came to a halt by Farmer Giles's elbow. "What a whopper!" he exclaimed. "Goodness me," she said. "Whatever's happened to that?" She was holding a very long, very round, very bright green and yellow striped marrow. Broomstick was delighted, and Blackcat couldn't believe his eyes. "It's got a place next to mine," said Farmer Giles, as he placed the marrow gently behind a label saying Heggarty Haggerty. The marrow was enormous. It was bigger than any other marrow in the competition. Broomstick was pleased. "Tea time," said Farmer Giles. "It's time for a quick cuppa before the judging starts." It took Farmer Giles a moment or two to persuade Heggarty Haggerty to leave the marrow. She was feeling a little uneasy about it growing so big in such a short time. "Oh, it'll be perfectly safe," he assured her, and led her to the tea tent. Broomstick looked at the marrow and rubbed his hands together in glee. "Heggarty Haggerty's the winner," he chuckled. "Heggarty Haggerty's the winner," and he flew out of the tent to explore the rest of the fete. Heggarty Haggerty and Farmer Giles were eating slices of delicious, sticky chocolate cake. Between mouthfuls, Heggarty Haggerty explained why she didn't want to leave the marrow. "It grew that big in a matter of minutes, you see." Farmer Giles did see and thought it was very unusual. You don't think Broomstick had anything to do with it, do you?" he asked. "Well," said Heggarty Haggerty. But before she had a chance to reply, they were startled by cries and shouts from outside. "Fetch Heggarty Haggerty, and help, and where's Farmer Giles?" Blackcat knew in an instant that something dreadful had happened. Outside the tea tent, Heggarty Haggerty and Farmer Giles were astonished at the sight which met their eyes. The marrow tent was heaving and bulging. Something inside was getting bigger. Every few seconds there was a loud ping as a guy rope was wrenched from the ground. Gradually, more and more enormous green and yellow stripes could be seen as Heggarty Haggerty's marrow grew bigger and bigger. "Broomstick!" thundered Heggarty Haggerty so loudly that Blackcat leapt from her shoulder. Broomstick arrived with a swish, looking very worried. This was not what he had meant to happen at all. Heggarty Haggerty was furious. "Take me home at once," she shouted. "I need my book of spells." Broomstick flew her home as fast as he could to fetch her book of spells from behind the grandfather clock. Then he flew her back even faster. By now, Heggarty Haggerty's marrow had become the biggest marrow in the world. It was as tall as the church spire and almost as long as the village green. Everyone stared and pointed in amazement. Heggarty Haggerty quickly found a shrinking recipe in her book of spells and walked round and round the marrow, chanting the recipe's strange magic words. "Hick, hock, huck, dick, dock, duck, you've got to go back. Hick, hock, hack, to being the size you were. Diddle-do-dee, de-fiddle-fo-fee, do it at once so we all can see." The marrow began to get smaller and smaller. Each time she passed Broomstick, she gave him a very stern look, until he felt that he was shrinking too. Then at last she slammed shut her book of spells. Heggarty Haggerty looked at the marrow. It was back to its proper size. In fact, it was difficult to see it amongst all the mess that was left. "This is what comes of cheating," said Heggarty Haggerty. "Being a good gardener is what counts when you're growing marrows." "Yes, I'm sorry," said Broomstick. "What a mess," said Heggarty Haggerty angrily. "You'd better start tidying up straight away." There was a lot of tidying up to do. There was the tent to fold up, ropes to untangle, squashed marrows to pick up. In fact, enough tidying up for an army. By the time Broomstick arrived home, he was more sorry than he could say, so Heggarty Haggerty gave him a hug and forgave him. "I'll never make magic fertilizer again," he promised. Blackcat looked at him through half-closed eyes. "I wonder," he thought, and he curled up into a tight ball and fell fast asleep. I don't think Broomstick will be doing any gardening again in a hurry. Do you? Heggerty Haggerty and the Amazing Loaf of Bread. Hello, I've just been shopping. I've been to the shop to buy some tea, some oranges, and a nice crusty loaf of bread. It looks delicious. Bread, butter and jam, my favourite. That's what I'll have for tea. But first, I'm going to tell you a story. It's all about a loaf of bread Heggerty Haggerty made. It all started one sunny spring morning. The sky was as blue as blue. Heggerty Haggerty was in the kitchen watching the toast. "Something's burning," said Broomstick as he came in. "Oh, drat it," said Heggerty Haggerty. The toast was black. "Will it scrape?" Heggerty Haggerty looked at the toast doubtfully. "It might. I'll put some more on anyway," she said, "and that'll finish the loaf. I'll have to go down to the village and buy some more." At breakfast, as they sat munching their toast and marmalade, Heggerty Haggerty read the morning newspaper. The heading across the front page said, "Fire at Bread Factory." "That means no more bread and no more toast and marmalade," said Broomstick. "What will we have for breakfast?" Heggerty Haggerty smiled. "Do you know, I would like to make a nice cottage loaf. I haven't made bread for ages." Heggerty Haggerty went into the kitchen to see if she had all the things she needed. She looked in the cupboard. There was plenty of flour, sugar in the sugar bowl, cooking oil in the bottle, salt in the salt cellar, and most especially some dried yeast in a little packet. "What does the yeast do?" Broomstick wanted to know. "It makes the bread rise." Broomstick thought that was very clever of it. But he was worried because Heggerty Haggerty only had one tiny packet of yeast. "It's very titchy. It won't make a very big loaf," he thought. Magic yeast would be a good idea, he thought, because magic yeast would make a whopping great loaf. Broomstick fetched the book of spells from behind the grandfather clock and put it on the table. He turned the pages of the book and found Yeast, Special Magic Recipe. Take 1 whisker from a witch's black cat. Whisker, I whisper softly to you, magic the yeast to a whiskerer's brew. Add to yeast and leave for 5 minutes. Broomstick closed the book of spells and put it back behind the grandfather clock. The recipe was simple enough if Black Cat would lend him a whisker. Broomstick turned to the hearthrug. It was empty. Black Cat had gone. "Oh, bother," said Broomstick, and flew into the kitchen. Heggerty Haggerty was busy weighing out the flour. "Where's the yeast?" Broomstick asked. "Keeping warm on top of the cooker," said Heggerty Haggerty. "It'll be ready in about 20 minutes. Because it's dried yeast, we have to wait for it to work." Broomstick nodded. It could not be better. It meant he had time to find Black Cat and borrow a whisker. He looked around in the kitchen and spied Black Cat sitting under the kitchen table, washing his paws. Broomstick swooped down, and Black Cat scuttled into the living room. "Please, Black Cat, please, lend me a whisker," Broomstick begged in a whisper. "I need it ever so badly." Black Cat shook his head. But before he could do anything about it, a whisker dropped onto the hearthrug. As quick as a flash, Broomstick picked it up. "I'll give it back, honest," he said, and then he flew into the kitchen. Black Cat let out a sigh and curled up. Broomstick flew straight to the cooker. When Heggerty Haggerty wasn't looking, he dropped Black Cat's whisker into the yeast mixture. It lay on the froth for a moment before disappearing. 5 minutes from now, Broomstick thought, and rushed to the door to look at the grandfather clock. He leaned against the door. From there he could see both the yeast mixture and the clock. "Well, everything's ready," said Heggerty Haggerty, who had just finished greasing the baking tray. "I'm just waiting for the yeast." Broomstick grinned. So was he. Heggerty Haggerty went to the cooker and looked in the bowl. The whisker had been in the mixture for 3 minutes. Broomstick was keeping a careful count. "Another couple of minutes should do it," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Perfect," thought Broomstick. "That's what I think." "Goodness," said Heggerty Haggerty, "you are being efficient." Heggerty Haggerty poured the yeast mixture over the flour. Broomstick saw the whisker and grabbed it. "Fingers out," said Heggerty Haggerty, giving them a gentle smack. Broomstick grinned. The whisker was safe. Heggerty Haggerty rolled up her sleeves and plunged her fingers into the bowl. "Do you have to do all that biffing?" Broomstick asked. "Absolutely essential to a good loaf of bread," Heggerty Haggerty assured him. Broomstick flew into the living room. "Here's your whisker back, Black Cat," he whispered. "What happens next?" Broomstick asked when he was back in the kitchen. We have to let the dough rise, then we bash it down again, make it into the shape of a cottage loaf, let it rise again, and put it in the oven. But that'll take ages, sighed Broomstick. Never mind, said Heggarty Haggerty. It'll be baked by lunchtime. She put the dough in the bowl and put it to warm in front of the fire in the living room. Heggarty Haggerty sat down in her armchair and picked up her knitting. Broomstick could not think of anything to do except wait. This'll take hours, he thought. But Broomstick was wrong. The dough swelled and doubled its size in 10 minutes. Look, said Broomstick, it's ready. So it is, said Heggarty Haggerty in surprise. That was quick. Heggarty Haggerty carried the bowl of dough into the kitchen. She covered the table with flour and tipped the dough onto it. She knocked all the puff out of it, kneaded it and cut it into 2 pieces, one big and one small. The big piece is for the bottom of the loaf, and the small piece is for the top, she said. Broomstick watched as Heggarty Haggerty rounded the big piece of dough into a ball. Then she rounded the small piece into a ball and put it on top of the other piece. She pressed the loaf into shape. Then she carried it back into the living room and put it back by the fire. To prove, she said. To prove what? Asked Broomstick. To rise up. That's what it's called. Proving. Heggarty Haggerty sat and knitted. Broomstick leaned against the mantelpiece and watched. As he watched, he could see the loaf begin to rise. It grew and grew and grew until it was twice its original size. It's proved, Broomstick cried. Goodness, so it has, said Heggarty Haggerty. Heggarty Haggerty carried the loaf into the kitchen and brushed the top with some milk. She opened the oven door and popped the loaf in. There, she said. It'll be done in about 50 minutes. We can look at it then. Broomstick was not at all sure that Heggarty Haggerty was right. The loaf seemed to be doing everything at double speed. He decided to stay and keep an eye on it. Heggarty Haggerty went back into the living room to do some more knitting. After a few minutes, Broomstick opened the oven door and peeped inside. The loaf was already turning brown, and Broomstick was sure it was bigger than before. It'll soon be done, he thought. In minutes, if you ask me. He flew into the living room to tell Heggarty Haggerty. It can't possibly be ready. It's only been in the oven for 10 minutes, she said. Come and see, cried Broomstick. Heggarty Haggerty came into the kitchen and opened the oven door. The loaf was huge and crusty brown. Well, that's the oddest loaf of bread I've ever made, she said, putting on her oven gloves. You're right, it is done. Heggarty Haggerty lifted the loaf onto the table and put it onto a cooling rack to cool. It'll be interesting to see what it tastes like. We'll try some when it's cool. With these words, she went back into the living room. Broomstick was very pleased. He wondered what was going to happen next, and just in case it was something noisy, he shut the door. There was not long to wait. Something was trying to get out of the top of the loaf. There was a loud pop, and a baby cottage loaf shot up to the ceiling. Broomstick caught it. There was another pop, and another, and another. Cottage loaves were landing all over the kitchen. It was raining cottage loaves. The kitchen door flew open. Whatever's going on? Shouted Heggarty Haggerty above the noise of the popping. A cottage loaf landed on her head and bounced onto the floor. Broomstick, who was desperately trying to make a neat pile of loaves, cried, Surprise! I magicked the yeast. It certainly is a surprise, said Heggarty Haggerty, rubbing the bump on her head. Snip, snap, snap, snop, I'm telling you not to plop, she cried, and clicked her fingers. There was a purple and blue flash, and the popping stopped. What on earth are we going to do with all this bread? Oh, wait a minute. I've a good idea. Blackcat, who was standing in the doorway, guessed at once. Heggarty Haggerty sent Broomstick off to ask Farmer Giles if he would drive up with his tractor and trailer. When he arrived, they loaded the bread onto the trailer and drove down to the village. There, on the village green, Heggarty Haggerty had a bread stall. Everyone in the village was very pleased, because it meant they had some bread, in spite of the fire at the bread factory. Magic yeast was a good idea after all, said Broomstick. You've saved the day, old chap, said Farmer Giles, slapping him on the back. Yes, agreed Heggarty Haggerty. For once, he has. Blackcat watched as the happy villagers took home their crusty loaves of bread. Then he wrapped himself around Heggarty Haggerty's neck and purred as Farmer Giles drove them home. And that's the end of the story. I think that must be the most amazing loaf of bread ever made, don't you? I can just imagine everyone tucking into bread and jam when they got home. Oh, which reminds me, I'm feeling a bit peckish. It's time for me to have a little something. Heggerty Haggerty's Day at the Fair. This story is all about Heggerty Haggerty's Day at the Fair. It all started one spring morning as Heggerty Haggerty woke up to find Broomstick standing by her bed with a tray. On it was a steaming teapot, a jug of milk, and a cup and saucer. "I brought you tea in bed," he said with a grin. "Shall I draw the curtains?" He flung the curtains back and let in the sunshine. "See, it's a lovely day. And you know what? I'd bring you tea in bed every day if I was up first." "What a lovely thought," said Heggerty Haggerty sleepily. "You've not forgotten we're going to the fair today, have you?" Heggerty Haggerty sat up. "Of course I haven't. Only it's very early. The fair won't be open yet." "Just so long as you haven't forgotten," said Broomstick, and he left Heggerty Haggerty to enjoy her tea. After breakfast, Heggerty Haggerty said it was time to go. Blackcat trotted into the garden, shining from his early morning wash. Heggerty Haggerty pulled on her tall black hat with a bend in it. "Have you remembered your purse?" Broomstick asked. "Of course," said Heggerty Haggerty, and patted her pocket. "Have you remembered yours?" "Yes, I have," said Broomstick. He'd been saving his pocket money for ages. When they were all in the garden, Heggerty Haggerty and Blackcat sat on Broomstick's back. He took off with such a whoosh that Heggerty Haggerty nearly lost her hat. "Steady on, Broomstick," she called. But Broomstick was in a hurry. It wasn't every day he went to the fair. The countryside lay far below. They could see Farmer Giles' farm, the village, and the fair, which was spread across a large field. They could see the big wheel turning and the octopus waving its arms. Soon they heard the music, hooters and engines and screams of delight. As Heggerty Haggerty, Broomstick and Blackcat looked down, a swarthy-faced man looked up. "Look at that, Joe," said the man, nudging his workmate. "Flying broomstick. If I had one of those, I'd make a fortune. Broomstick rise 20 pence a go, or roll up, come and see the only flying broomstick in the world." "Don't be daft, Fred," said Joe, wiping his fingers on his shirt. "That broomstick belongs to somebody already, that's obvious." "What do I care?" said Fred, tickling the stubble on his grizzly chin. "If I could get that broomstick, I'd be a rich man." "Either that or in jail," said Joe, licking his chin to make sure he'd eaten all his hamburger. "Come on, Fred, I'm going to get some candy floss." And the two men strolled off as the broomstick landed in front of the merry-go-round. "Would you like a go?" asked Heggerty Haggerty. As it had stopped, Blackcat and Heggerty Haggerty climbed aboard. Blackcat chose to sit on a black horse with a flowing mane. He tucked his paws round the gold and red pole and held on tightly. Heggerty Haggerty sat on a white horse next to Blackcat. "Aren't you going to have a ride?" she asked Broomstick. "No, I don't think so. I want to have a look around." The merry-go-round began to turn, and Broomstick waved goodbye before disappearing into the crowd. He wandered from stall to stall, and he was wondering whether he would be able to win a goldfish, when he felt a tap on his shoulder. "Hello, Broomstick, old lad, enjoying yourself, are you?" It was Farmer Giles. "I certainly am. Would you like to go on the dodgems?" he asked. "I would," said Farmer Giles. And a few minutes later, when Heggerty Haggerty and Blackcat were passing the dodgems, she noticed with a start of surprise that the daredevil driver in the weaving red dodgem was Broomstick, and the speedy driver in the zigzagging green dodgem was Farmer Giles. "I counted 27 bumps," laughed Broomstick when the ride was over. "You're not supposed to bump anyone, you're supposed to dodge 'em," grinned Farmer Giles. "What are we going to do next?" "Does anyone fancy a ride on the ghost train?" asked Heggerty Haggerty. Blackcat shuddered. Then he remembered it was pretend ghosts. "Yes, please," said Broomstick. The four of them walked towards the ghost train, chatting happily. They didn't notice the two rough-looking characters who were watching them closely. "Don't be daft, Fred," said Joe. "If you steal that broomstick, you'll never get away with it." "Keep your voice down," snapped Fred. "They'll hear you." "Look, Fred, please don't. I can't do it single-handed, you know. If we're really lucky, they'll take a trip on a ghost train and then we'll have him easy as pie, said Fred. The two men followed Heggerty Haggerty, Broomstick, Blackcat, and Farmer Giles. They scurried from one stall to another. If anyone looked back, they stood still and picked their teeth or pretended to look for something on the ground. They made themselves so noticeable that in the end, Heggerty Haggerty said, "Those two men are behaving most oddly." "Rough-looking types, aren't they?" said Farmer Giles. "Up to no good, I expect." At the ghost train booth, Heggerty Haggerty paid the lady for 4 tickets. Ahead were the open carriages of the ghost train. "Isn't it spooky?" said Broomstick. "Yes, it is a bit," said Heggerty Haggerty. Blackcat climbed onto Heggerty Haggerty's lap, where he felt a bit safer. They were the only passengers on this trip. As soon as they were seated, the train began to move, and they were in a dark tunnel. "Oh!" cried Broomstick as a dangling spider's web caught him in the face and made him duck. "Eek!" screamed Heggerty Haggerty as a blue light lit up a dancing skeleton. "Oh!" growled Blackcat as he saw a pack of rats jumping up and down on springs. "My goodness," said Farmer Giles, as a fearsome howl echoed down the tunnel and flashing blue and green lights lit up a haunted castle. "Ooh!" wailed a ghost. A bat flapped into the carriage. Blackcat spat and Broomstick tried to grab it. Suddenly they were in an underground cavern. White ghosts with flashing red eyes jumped out at them, bats flapped, ghosts howled, and skeletons rattled. Then the lights went out. The train stopped, and there was silence. It was pitch dark. "It looks like a complete breakdown," said Heggerty Haggerty. And as Broomstick was about to answer, a hand clapped over his mouth and he was pulled from the train. "This won't do," said Heggerty Haggerty, and lit up her finger, shedding blue light on the eerie, silent scene. "Great heavens," said Farmer Giles, as he saw a huddled figure disappearing through the curtains. Before Heggerty Haggerty and Blackcat could move, the lights came on, and the train came out of the tunnel at the end of the ride. Broomstick and Farmer Giles had gone. Outside the ghost train, a crowd had gathered. In the middle of it was Farmer Giles, sitting on Fred, who was crying, "It's all a mistake, I'm innocent." Joe was next to him, shouting, "I told you not to do it. You didn't think what would happen if they had a box of matches, did you?" Heggerty Haggerty remembered her finger was still glowing and put it out. It was much better than a box of matches, but she didn't say anything. The manager of the fair arrived with Constable Bradshaw, the village policeman. "Oh, no, not you two again," said the manager. Constable Bradshaw handcuffed Fred and Joe together and marched them off. "I was kidnapped," Broomstick told Blackcat. And Farmer Giles' prompt action saved the day. "Otherwise, goodness knows where you'd be by now," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Well, I couldn't let them get away with my friend Broomstick now, could I?" said Farmer Giles. Laughing, they went off to explore the rest of the fair. And I expect they had some fun, don't you? Heggerty Haggerty and the Circus Lion. Do you like circuses? Well, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened when the circus came to town. The circus was in an enormous tent on the village green, and there were clowns, acrobats, elephants, and a huge lion. That morning, Heggerty Haggerty was sitting at the breakfast table reading the paper. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the front door. Broomstick flew and opened it. "Morning, all." It was Farmer Giles, and he stood panting and mopping his brow with a red spotted handkerchief. "I've rushed up here to tell you there's an escaped lion roaming the countryside. I thought I'd better warn you, because it's not safe to go out. Not until he's caught." "I was just reading about an escaped lion in the newspaper," said Heggerty Haggerty. "It says, 'Village terrorized by roaring lion.'" "That's the one. It's the lion from the circus on the village green." "Goodness me," said Heggerty Haggerty. "You'll be all right if you stay indoors. I'm off back to the farm. I'm going to lock the cows in the cowshed to keep them safe," said Farmer Giles. "Bye for now." Heggerty Haggerty looked at Broomstick. "What a thing to happen," she said. "It means there's going to be a lion hunt," said Broomstick. Heggerty Haggerty and Broomstick looked thoughtful. No one would be safe to go outside until the lion was found. Blackcat stared into the fire. He looked into the flickering flames and pretended he could see the lion padding towards him, and he felt very proud as he thought how he, Blackcat the cat, was related to such a handsome beast. I, Blackcat, will find the lion, he told himself. Without a stretch, he jumped out of the open window and was gone. Heggerty Haggerty and Broomstick decided that they would help search for the lion. They will be quite safe flying on Broomstick's back. I'll just fetch my book of spells just in case and we'll be off, she said. Broomstick noticed that Blackcat had gone. You don't think he's gone to look for the lion by himself, do you? He asked, not quite believing that Blackcat would. Heggerty Haggerty was sure he wouldn't, but for once she was wrong. She didn't know that Blackcat was now Blackcat the Brave, or that he was trotting across the hillside, his nostrils twitching as he sniffed for the smell of the escaped lion. The sun shone on Blackcat's coat, making it gleam. Perhaps he's hiding in the wood, he thought, and he trotted towards the trees. It was different in the wood. The sun crept between the branches, making pools of light in the shadows. Blackcat stalked slowly from tree to tree, looking, listening, smelling for danger. If the lion was there, Blackcat wanted to find the lion before the lion found him. The gloom in the wood made Blackcat feel nervous. In every shadow he saw danger. He didn't feel brave anymore. His nose twitched as a strange new smell drifted towards him. Something moved between the trees. Something was padding through the wood. Blackcat's eyes searched the shadows and saw the circus lion coming straight towards him. Blackcat stood rooted to the spot until the great beast towered over him. Its huge mouth opened, and with a roar like an angry wind it said, "Hello!" It was the loudest voice Blackcat had ever heard, and his legs began to wobble like jelly. "I very nearly trod on you. You're a cat, aren't you?" said the lion. "I'm Blackcat," meowed Blackcat. "I've come to find you." "Find me?" The lion sounded surprised. "Are you a friend or foe, little black cat?" "Friend," said Blackcat, "very definitely a friend." "I need a friend," said the lion sadly. A rumble like distant thunder came from his tummy. "I don't suppose you know where I could get some breakfast, do you? I haven't had anything to eat for ages." "Don't they feed you at the circus?" asked Blackcat. "Is that why you ran away?" "Oh, no," said the lion. "They feed me all right. I ran away because I'm fed up with doing silly tricks. I hate it. I feel such a fool. All that jumping through hoops and stuff, it's so undignified, especially at my age." A big tear rolled down his furry face. "And if I won't do it, they prod me with sticks until I will. It's just not fair." "Oh, please don't cry, King Lion," said Blackcat. "Heggerty Haggerty will help you. She's very kind." "Thank you," sobbed the lion. "Let's go and find you some breakfast." And Blackcat proudly led the way out of the wood. Meanwhile, Heggerty Haggerty and Broomstick had given up the idea of searching for the lion and were searching for Blackcat instead. As Broomstick flew over the hillside, he saw Blackcat with the lion close on his tail. "Quick," said Broomstick, "we must save Blackcat. The lion's after him." Heggerty Haggerty nearly lost her balance as Broomstick swerved downwards. "It's all right," she cried. "The lion's not chasing Blackcat. They're walking together." Heggerty Haggerty and Broomstick landed a few yards ahead of Blackcat and the lion. The lion gave a startled roar. "Don't be scared," said Blackcat. "This is Heggerty Haggerty, and this is Broomstick." The lion looked uncertain. His tummy gave an enormous hollow rumble. "And this must be King Lion. He seems to be friendly, and he sounds very hungry," said Heggerty Haggerty with a friendly smile. "Let's go home. I'm sure you could do with a little breakfast." At home, Heggerty Haggerty and Broomstick opened tin after tin of sardines and pilchards until there was a huge pile of tins outside the back door. Blackcat was amazed to see how much the lion ate. But at last he was full, and as he washed his face with his big furry paws, Blackcat explained why the lion had run away from the circus. "What a shame," said Heggerty Haggerty. "I think I know where he'd be really happy." A dog barked in the distance. The lion was on his feet in a moment, growling. "It's men with nets and a tracker dog," said Broomstick, looking out of the window. "They'll be here in a minute." "We'll meet them at the gate," said Heggerty Haggerty. Farmer Giles, who was on his way up from the farm, had also heard the dog, and they all arrived at the gate at the same time. "Have you got our lion in there?" asked the man with the dog rudely. "I have," replied Heggerty Haggerty. "Well, let's be having him then," said the man. "I'm afraid you can't have the lion back," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Oh, really?" said the man with a sneer. "Come on, lads, let's get him." The dog snarled. Suddenly there was a loud crack, a puff of purple smoke, and the men stood frozen to the spot. "You see," said Heggerty Haggerty, as if nothing strange had happened, "he's been a circus lion for a very long time, and he's had enough. I think it's only fair that he should be allowed to retire to the safari park. Don't you?" Heggerty Haggerty clicked her fingers and the men could move again. Yes," said the man with the dog nervously. "Retirement to the safari park. Good idea. We'll leave him with you then." And they hurried off down the hill, not daring to look back in case something worse than being frozen to the spot happened to them. "Well, that's settled then," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Come inside, Farmer Giles, and meet the lion." Later that day, they all arrived at the safari park in Farmer Giles' trailer, and then after saying goodbye, the lion ran off with his new friends. At last he was happy. "He'll never have to do circus tricks again," purred Blackcat to himself, as he snuggled up on Heggerty's lap, and Farmer Giles' tractor rumbled home. And that's the end of the story. I think it was a happy end, especially for the lion. Don't you? Heggerty Haggerty and the 5th of November. Hello. This story is all about what happened to Broomstick on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes night, and how he learned that you must be very careful of fireworks, especially magic ones. Heggerty Haggerty was humming happily to herself as she dusted the mantelpiece and swept the floor. It was not exactly a tune, more like the buzzing of a bee. It was so like the buzzing of a bee that every new hum, Blackcat would look round to see if he could see one. Went Heggerty Haggerty. She flicked her duster playfully at Broomstick. Remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot, said Broomstick. It's today. Is it, said Heggerty Haggerty, and with a final flick of her duster she went into the kitchen. I hope Heggerty Haggerty's not forgotten to make any. Any what? Wondered Blackcat, who was still keeping an eye out for bees. Remember last year, Blackcat? Remember the bonfire and the whooshing rockets? Broomstick whooshed noisily round the room. Goodness me, what's all the noise? Asked Heggerty Haggerty. I'm being a rocket, just to remind you in case you've forgotten. Forgotten what? To make any fireworks, said Broomstick. Well, of course I haven't forgotten. Can I see them? Broomstick's eyes were alight. No, you can't, said Heggerty Haggerty. You'll have to wait until tonight. Bother, said Broomstick. But there was nothing to do but wait. The rest of the day passed slowly, as days always do when you're waiting for something exciting to happen. At last tea was over and it was dark outside. They wrapped themselves up in woolly scarves and gloves to keep out the damp November cold, and Heggerty Haggerty brought the big box of fireworks from the kitchen. Broomstick stared at the box. There were long-coloured tubes, fat round tubes, rainbow pyramids, circular Catherine wheels, and rockets galore. Can we take them out and have a look, he asked. Certainly not. You may look, but not touch. These fireworks are dangerous and a touch temperamental, said Heggarty Haggerty. Why? Because they're made with recipes from my book of spells, of course. Well, that only makes them magic like me, said Broomstick, and I'm not dangerous. You are not made from gunpowder, said Heggarty Haggerty. Gunpowder, Blackcat, did you hear that? Said Broomstick, and they went outside. Moonlight lit their way as they started out for the village. Every year, on the 5th of November, the village held a firework party. For weeks the children had gathered wood for the bonfire, and it stood ready in the middle of the village green. The children had made the guy at school, and he was waiting by the bonfire in a wheelbarrow. There were candles in jam jars and lanterns on poles lighting the garden. When they arrived, Heggarty Haggerty carried the box of fireworks to the bonfire. Broomstick flew somersaults in the air with excitement, and the children ran to watch him. Look at me, I'm a Catherine wheel, he cried. The children laughed. Look at the bonfire, it's as big as a house, said Broomstick, flying around it and over it. Where's the guy? The guy's down here, called Heggarty Haggerty. Come and look. Hello, said Farmer Giles. What a pile of fireworks. Heggarty Haggerty chose a rocket from her box of fireworks and stuck it in the guy's hat. That's a tiddly rocket, complained Broomstick. Give him a better one in his hat. It's too small, it won't go anywhere. You're only a teeny-weeny fizzler. Farmer Giles leaned a ladder against the bonfire. He slung the guy over his shoulder and carried him up. He sat the guy on top of the bonfire so that the rocket pointed towards the sky and climbed down again. Are we ready to begin? Asked Heggarty Haggerty. Yes, the children cried. Yes, 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 cried Broomstick. Stand well back, said Heggarty Haggerty. She lit a match. The dry paper at the bottom of the bonfire burst into flames. As the flames leapt upwards, the wood crackled and spat. Hooray! Cried Broomstick. Hooray! Cried the children. Wait for the rocket to go! Wait for the rocket to go! Shouted Broomstick. The fire climbed higher and higher, orange and hungry. Wait for the rocket to go! Wait for the rocket to go! And he flew into the air to get a closer look. Come down at once, called Heggarty Haggerty. You'll catch fire. Blackcat had shut his eyes, not daring to look. I'm not near the flames. I'm waiting for the little fizzler to go. A flame darted up and caught the rocket's touch paper, which started to glow. Here it goes, cried Broomstick. Whoosh went the rocket, leaving a trail of golden stars behind it. But instead of shooting up into the sky as expected, it flew round the bonfire, straight at Broomstick, and took off with him on its nose. Oh no, said Heggarty Haggerty. I knew it wouldn't like being called a teeny-weeny fizzler. Come on, said Farmer Giles, let's get after it. The rocket was whooshing round and round the church spire. It was travelling so fast that neither Broomstick nor the rocket could be seen, only a trail of glittering golden stars. How long before it runs out of puff? Asked Farmer Giles. It was one of my best, said Heggarty Haggerty. It'll be 10 minutes at least. Watch out! Shouted Farmer Giles. Everyone ducked as the rocket whooshed low over their heads and sped across the village green. It narrowly missed the village shop and turned, flew up the hill, high into the sky where it looped the loop, leaving golden stars falling to earth in circles. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, muttered Heggarty Haggerty. It's coming back this way, stand clear, shouted Farmer Giles. Broomstick, who'd spent most of this hair-raising journey with his eyes tightly shut, opened them just in time to see himself plunging at high speed towards the village green. Oh no, he groaned, crash landing coming up. But just at the last minute, the rocket looped sharply upwards and spiralled into the sky. Broomstick shut his eyes again. The wind rushed in his ears. He felt giddy and rather sick. Suddenly the rocket exploded. Hundreds of brightly coloured stars fell earthwards, leaving Broomstick reeling through the sky. Down he came, faster and faster. Watch where you're going, called Heggarty Haggerty. But she was too late. Broomstick landed with a splash right in the middle of the duck pond. The ducks squawked and flapped in protest as Broomstick splashed about trying to find dry land. Farmer Giles waded in to the rescue. Broomstick, are you all right? He asked. I don't think it liked being called a teeny-weeny fizzler, said Broomstick. I think it made that quite clear, said Heggarty Haggerty. They stood dripping, shivering Broomstick in front of the bonfire. Mrs. Bates, the shopkeeper, gave him a good rub down with a towel. The children thought Broomstick a hero. Soon he had a cup of cocoa in one hand and a hot dog in the other. and he listened whilst they told him how spectacular his flight had looked from the ground. When Heggerty Haggerty was quite sure that Broomstick hadn't suffered any ill effects from his adventure, she started the firework display. All sorts of wonderful things began to happen, to choruses of oohs and ahs from the crowd. Everyone was spellbound. Then it was over. Only the glowing embers of the bonfire remained. Broomstick and the children stared into the dying embers, drinking their cocoa, tired but happy. Then it was time to say good-night and go home. Later, when Heggerty Haggerty tucked Broomstick up in bed, he said, "I'm sorry about the rocket and getting wet." "So I should think," said Heggerty Haggerty. She forgave him, of course, even though he had given everyone such a fright. Blackcat curled up at the end of the bed and gave a little purr. Heggerty Haggerty and the Halloween Ghosts. Hello. I'm going to tell you the story of what happened when Broomstick tried to play a trick on Heggerty Haggerty and Blackcat. Things didn't turn out quite as he wanted them to. It was a chilly autumn morning. When Heggerty Haggerty looked out of her bedroom window, the fields were covered in mist and the trees looked bare without their leaves. It's the beginning of winter, she thought sadly. But now she was frying eggs for breakfast and was more cheerful. The fried bread was cooked and keeping warm, the toast was on and the kettle whistling. "Hurry up, Broomstick, breakfast's nearly ready," she called. "I'll make the tea," said Broomstick as he came in, "and I'll watch the toast." Blackcat agreed with that. He'd eaten 4 sardines and cleaned his whiskers and was now lying warm and content in front of the fire. After breakfast, Broomstick fetched his book of ghost stories from upstairs. When Heggerty Haggerty read them a story at bedtime, he snuggled under the bedclothes and pretended to be frightened. Sometimes he really was. "I haven't time to read a story now," said Heggerty Haggerty, catching sight of the book. "Oh, but I wanted the haunted house story again," said Broomstick. "It was really creepy." "If you want the haunted house story, you'll have to read it yourself." "But it's not the same as when you read it," complained Broomstick. "I haven't got time to read a story now," said Heggerty Haggerty. "I've got work to do. You'll have to wait until bedtime." "Till bedtime," sighed Broomstick, flopping down beside Blackcat and waking him up. "I can't wait until then." Blackcat yawned. "Blackcat, do you want to hear a ghost story?" "No," meowed Blackcat, who turned over and went back to sleep. Taking no notice, Broomstick began to read the story of the haunted house. Once upon a time, there was an old, old house. He stopped and looked around the room. "I know, I could pretend our house is the old, old house in the story," he chuckled. "This will be the day the haunted house story comes to life. I'll get things I need right away." And with the book under his arm, he flew upstairs. Heggerty Haggerty could hear him banging around in his bedroom. "What are you doing?" she called. "I'm making a surprise." "I wonder what that'll be," she thought, as she looked in her book of spells. Heggerty Haggerty was having an ingredients day. It was the kind of day she had when it was too cold or wet to be out of doors. She was going to check the ingredients list in the book of spells against the ingredients she had in the jars on the shelf, to make sure she had everything she needed. "Oh, bother," she said. "Out of moon dust again." Back in the kitchen, she put some moon rocks into a large mortar and lifted the pestle. Pound, 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 it went on the rocks. Pound, pound, pound. It was hard work making moon dust. Broomstick was pleased to hear the noisy pounding coming from the kitchen because he was going to make a noise and didn't want Heggerty Haggerty to hear. He went to the cupboard under the stairs and fetched a hammer, some nails, and a large ball of string. He set to work banging in nails and threading string along the ceiling one way and under the carpet the other. The noise was too much for Blackcat. He ran upstairs and curled up on Heggerty Haggerty's bed. When Broomstick had finished, he put the hammer and remaining nails back in the cupboard. He'd used up all the string. "Heggerty Haggerty won't notice any difference," he said. "I'll arrange the things on the end of the string this afternoon when she goes shopping." Heggerty Haggerty came in from the kitchen looking hot and bothered. "Can you give me a hand with the moon dust, please?" she asked. "My arms are about to drop off." "All right," said Broomstick. He was feeling pleased. Things were working out well. That afternoon, when Heggerty Haggerty had gone to the village to do her shopping, Broomstick tied all the things he had made to the pieces of string and tested them to see if they worked. They did. "That's perfect," he said. "I've just got to wait until it gets dark." It was quite early in the evening when Broomstick announced he was going to bed. "Would you like me to read you a story?" asked Heggerty Haggerty. "No, thanks," said Broomstick with a big yawn. "I'm much too tired." "Really?" said Heggerty Haggerty. "Yes, really," said Broomstick. "Good night." "Good night," said Heggerty Haggerty. She settled herself in her chair and listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock and the gentle moan of the wind in the chimney. Blackcat slept at her feet. Everything was peaceful. "What a pleasant way to spend an evening," she sighed, and picked up her library book. Suddenly the lights went out. "Oh, drat those fuses," said Heggerty Haggerty. The room became full of flickering firelight shadows. She was about to get up when she heard a howling noise. Blackcat heard it too. From somewhere near the door came a rustling sound. Blackcat jumped up, his back arched, his fur stood on end, and he hissed. Something scuttled across the floor and stopped by the bottom of the stairs. Blackcat yowled and leapt onto the back of Heggerty Haggerty's chair. "Whoo-hoo-hoo-hoo!" went the howling noise. Heggerty Haggerty was about to go and see what had scuttled across the floor when the door of the cupboard under the stairs flew open and a sort of spider thing jumped out. It whizzed across the room and landed by the kitchen door. Blackcat let out another piercing yowl and leapt onto the table, which immediately began to creep across the room. Next, the cushion from Heggerty Haggerty's chair shot up to the ceiling and dangled there. "Whoo-hoo-hoo!" went the howling. With a magic word, Heggerty Haggerty lit up the end of her finger. Its blue light shone brightly. She saw a stuffed sock at the bottom of the stairs, a mop top by the kitchen door, and string tied to the table leg. She quickly put out her finger and picked up the terrified black cat. "Don't be frightened," she whispered. "It's only Broomstick." And she looked at the grandfather clock. By the firelight she could see it was nearly 10. "When the clock strikes 10, the tables will turn," she whispered mysteriously. Broomstick, who'd been pulling strings and woo-hoo-hooing at the top of the stairs ever since he put out the lights, was beginning to wonder what was happening downstairs. His hauntings had all worked very well, but what was the bumping coming from his bedroom? The bedroom was dark, and he could see a light shining through the curtains. He opened them and let out a scream. He was staring into the face of a creature with shining blue eyes. Its mouth was wide open, showing ugly orange teeth. Broomstick was sure it was trying to get in. He fled downstairs. "Heggerty Haggerty!" he called. "Heggerty Haggerty!" She wasn't there. Neither was Blackcat. He tripped over one of the strings. Silence. He could hear nothing but the beating of his heart. He was frightened. He opened the front door and went out into the chill air. Nothing but darkness. Then, onto the gate, floated another ghostly face, then another, and another. Soon the whole garden was covered in them. Broomstick shut the door, panting with fright. What's happening?" He flew into the kitchen and opened the back door. There were more of the ugly creatures all over the back garden. "Heggerty Haggerty!" he cried. "Heggerty Haggerty, where are you?" No reply. He flew back into the sitting room. On the table sat another ugly face. "The house really is haunted," he said with a terrified squeal. "What shall I do?" Then the lights came on. Broomstick saw at once that the ugly face was made from a hollowed-out turnip with a candle inside. "I've been tricked," he said. "You've been tricked," said Heggerty Haggerty. "What about Blackcat and me?" There was a knock at the front door, and Farmer Giles came in carrying another turnip lamp. "Oh, the garden looks a treat. Want to come and look, Broomstick?" "What's going on?" asked Broomstick. "It's Halloween," said Heggerty Haggerty. "I'd completely forgotten until Farmer Giles reminded me this afternoon." "But we should be out night flying," said Broomstick. "We should, but I think we've all had quite enough excitement for one day," smiled Heggerty Haggerty. "And now I think it's time for a cup of cocoa." They sipped their cocoa in the garden. Farmer Giles told Broomstick how he'd climbed a ladder to shine the Halloween lantern into his bedroom. "That's what the bumping was," said Broomstick. "I should have guessed." The turnip lanterns twinkled merrily. It was rather chilly, so they didn't stay outside for long, but they left the lanterns to twinkle by themselves until their lights went out. "What a lot of hauntings," sighed Broomstick. "It's the best Halloween I can ever remember." And he went upstairs to bed. Heggerty Haggerty and the Magic Medicine. The story I'm going to tell you now is what happened when Heggerty Haggerty made some magic medicine. As usual, Broomstick couldn't resist getting up to mischief, and things began to go wrong. It was a warm, sunny autumn day with a nip in the air. Blackcat lay dozing by the fire, his legs stretched out with his tummy facing the warmth. As he dozed, he heard footsteps coming up the garden path. The front door opened, and Heggerty Haggerty came in with the shopping. She pulled off her muddy boots and was glad she'd remembered to leave her slippers warming by the fire. "What a relief," she said, sitting down. "Home at last." Blackcat jumped onto Heggerty Haggerty's lap and rubbed her hand with his nose because he was pleased to see her. Then he sat down and purred as Heggerty Haggerty tickled his ears. The front door opened, and Broomstick flew in carrying a basket. "I've got the eggs," he said. "Farmer Giles let me collect them by myself. He's got a stinking cold, you know." "Oh dear," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Mrs. Bates has got one, and she says it's not just her. Everyone in the village has one." "Farmer Giles says there's a lot of it about," said Broomstick. "It's the time of year, I suppose," sighed Heggerty Haggerty. An idea crossed her mind, and she brightened up. "I know a recipe from my book of spells that would do the trick." She jumped up, and Blackcat landed neatly on all fours. Heggerty Haggerty fetched her book of spells from behind the grandfather clock and blew off the dust. "Pass my glasses, will you please, Broomstick?" "What are you looking for?" he asked as Heggerty Haggerty slipped her spectacles over her nose and slowly turned the pages. "A cold cure," she said. "You can cure anything if you can find the right recipe." Broomstick looked over Heggerty Haggerty's shoulder. There were recipes to make complaints as well. He knew that. You could make people sneeze or hop or cough or shiver. That was much more interesting than curing them. A recipe caught Broomstick's eye. "What's that?" he thought. "Recipe to make bumps appear? That sounds good." He wanted to read more, but Heggerty Haggerty turned the page. Bumps, thought Broomstick. A wicked glint came into his eye as he imagined Mrs. Bates the shopkeeper with bumps, Farmer Giles with bumps, even Heggerty Haggerty with bumps. An epidemic of bumps, he thought. What a joke! "Here we are," said Heggerty Haggerty. "Just what we need. A recipe to cure the common cold." Heggerty Haggerty took off her glasses and put them on the book of spells. Then she lifted the big black cauldron from the hob by the fire and carried it into the kitchen. "Bring my book, please, Broomstick," she called. Broomstick picked up the book of spells and turned back to the page which said, "Recipe to make bumps." "Heggerty Haggerty won't notice I've changed the page. She's left her glasses. We'll make the bumps recipe instead. Much more fun," chuckled Broomstick to himself as he flew into the kitchen. Blackcat watched from his place by the fire and wondered what Broomstick was up to. But he was much too comfortable to move and decided to find out later. "Now, let's see what we need," said Heggerty Haggerty. She peered at the list of ingredients under the heading Recipe to Make Bumps and began to read them out. Broomstick was pleased because she hadn't noticed it was the wrong recipe. "Great," he thought. "She's going to do it." "Well, don't just stand there grinning. Lend a hand," said Heggerty Haggerty, who was enjoying herself. They collected dried toadstools, roasted dandelions, batswing, newt oil, moon dust, lizard tail, fennel seeds, apple pips, and toasted slime. Heggerty Haggerty lifted the pestle and began to grind the ingredients in her mortar. It was hard work. "Collect the rest of the ingredients, Broomstick, then you can have a go at the grinding." Heggerty Haggerty's cheeks were pink. "Goodness, I'm getting hot," she puffed. Grind, grind, grind went the pestle in the mortar. Broomstick added more ingredients. "My turn," he said. Heggerty Haggerty gave Broomstick the pestle and mopped her brow with the handkerchief. Knowing that the recipe would cure all the colds in the village, she was feeling very jolly. She measured out 2 gallons of water and poured it in the cauldron. Then she fetched a big wooden spoon. Grind, grind, grind went the pestle round the mortar. "Do you think that's enough?" asked Broomstick. His arms were aching so much they felt as if they would drop off. "Nearly." Broomstick groaned. "I'll finish it," said Heggarty Haggerty. Grind, grind, grind went the pestle round the mortar. At long last, Heggarty Haggerty flicked the mixture with her finger. Not a lump in sight. She lifted the heavy mortar and carefully poured the powdered ingredients into the cauldron. Broomstick stirred them into the water with a big wooden spoon. Heggarty Haggerty added a drop of this and a drop of that while Broomstick kept stirring. "The next thing is to bring the mixture to the boil and cook it for 5 minutes. Heggarty Haggerty carried the cauldron into the living room and hung the handle on the hook above the fire. "It'll need stirring," she said. So Broomstick stirred as the mixture heated and steam began to rise. "Pooh, what a dreadful smell," meowed Blackcat, his nose twitching as he went into the kitchen. The book of spells was still open at the table. Blackcat jumped up and read, "Recipe to make bumps." "Oh, no, how awful. Heggarty Haggerty can't possibly know she's made a bumps recipe." He meowed and pointed to the words with his paw, but he was too late. "Off the table, I'm tidying up," said Heggarty Haggerty as she dropped him onto the floor. And before he could utter another meow, the book of spells was closed. In the living room, the magic medicine was making the most dreadful smell. "1 more minute and it'll be done," said Broomstick, looking at the clock. He didn't seem to notice how revolting the smell was. "Goodness," said Heggarty Haggerty. "It's very smelly. Not at all the kind of smell I'd expect from a cold cure recipe. Still, I'm sure it's all right. My book of spells is very reliable." Broomstick smiled. Blackcat didn't. "It's finished," said Broomstick. Heggarty Haggerty lifted the cauldron onto the hearth. "There's nothing to be done until it cools, so I'm going to make a nice cup of tea," she said. The mixture took a very long time to cool, as Heggarty Haggerty knew it would. At last, she decided to test it. She gave it a stir, then cautiously dipped her finger in. "Yes, that's very satisfactory," she said, holding her finger up in the air. For one awful moment, Blackcat thought she was going to lick it, but she wiped it on a cloth instead. "What I say is, prevention is better than cure." Heggarty Haggerty dipped a teaspoon into the magic mixture. "We'll all take a dose of the medicine now to stop us getting colds at all. You first, Broomstick." Broomstick's mouth dropped open in surprise, and before he knew what had happened, the teaspoon was in and he had swallowed the medicine. Blackcat let out a shrill caterwaul. Now, Blackcat, it's not as bad as that," said Heggarty Haggerty. Broomstick stood frozen to the spot, a look of horror on his face. "Don't be such a baby," she said. "I know it tasted nasty, but it'll do you good. Now it's my turn." But before the spoon could reach her mouth, quick as a flash, Blackcat leapt towards her and knocked it from Heggarty Haggerty's hand with his paw. "Blackcat, whatever's the matter with you?" cried Heggarty Haggerty, as Blackcat walked round and round her legs, meowing loudly. At that moment there was a knock at the door. Broomstick, who always rushed to open the door, stood in the corner by the grandfather clock looking miserable. So Heggarty Haggerty opened it instead. It was Farmer Giles. He held a cabbage in one hand and a red spotted handkerchief in the other. "Broomstick forgot this," he said, holding the cabbage. "Achoo!" He sneezed, catching the sneeze in his red spotted handkerchief. "Achoo!" "Broomstick, fetch a clean spoon from the kitchen, will you?" Broomstick, who was facing the wall, turned round. Heggarty Haggerty gasped. "Great heavens!" exclaimed Farmer Giles. "Broomstick, whatever's happened to you?" cried Heggarty Haggerty. "You're covered from top to toe with bumps." He looked terrible. Blackcat pointed to the cauldron and held his nose. Broomstick confessed. "I changed the page. I'm very sorry." A large tear trickled over several bumps and plopped onto the floor. Heggarty Haggerty was silent. "Well," she said at last, "it seems to me you've had a taste of your own medicine." Farmer Giles chuckled. "He's a wicked old thing, isn't he? He'd have enjoyed seeing everyone looking like that." "I could have given the whole village bumps. You really are the limit, Broomstick." Another tear plopped onto the floor. "Well, I suppose I'd better cure you first." "Yes, please," said Broomstick with a sob. "What a nuisance you are," said Heggerty Haggerty, shaking her head. "I'll have to make my cold cure later." "Let's hope he's learnt his lesson," smiled Farmer Giles. And I think he had. Don't you?